In this video, I'll talk about the different types of boundaries we have and how these different boundaries interact to create different types of disasters, right? But mainly different types of boundaries and what happens to the boundaries and what that causes. Now, when we talk about boundaries, I'm referring to, remember we've got different plates, oceanic crust or continental crust. And I'm not talking about the whole plate, but I'm talking about the boundaries, so the edges of those plates. So if you have one oceanic crust here and another crust here, these are two different plates. I'm talking about what happens just at the edges of those plates. That's the boundaries of those plates. Now there's three different types you need to know: divergent, convergent, and transform boundaries. Now it says here divergent boundaries. What happens is we have spreading, so spreading zones. The effect is it's constructive, so that means new things will be created. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And topography, so how do you know it's there? We'll actually have a ridge appearing, and we'll talk about why that happens in a second. And yes, volcanic activity does occur at divergent boundaries. All right, so imagine these two here. So this is oceanic crust number 1, and this is oceanic crust number 2. What's happening? They're divergent. Divergent means they're going apart. So they're going to go into opposite directions. Remember, 5 to 10 centimeters a year. So after a few millions of years, they'll have moved far enough apart to leave a small gap in between, right? So, after quite some time, we're going to have a small gap in between. Now, it's important to remember what's beneath the crust. Well, beneath the crust is the magma, right? So, we have the magma because we have the mantle here. And once a small little hole forms, or it's basically a barrier, what that means is that mantle will then go up and fill that hole. As in, magma will come up and fill that hole. Well, magma is just kind of very hot rock. Obviously, over time, that magma will then become solid, and all of a sudden, we have new ocean crust forming, right? So it'll just be part of that new plate. So that's ocean crust, and that's ocean crust. So we have basically the plate that reforms. And it's due to the magma that came from the mantle to fill in that gap. That happens at a divergent boundary. Now, convergent boundary, convergent means coming together. And there's two different things that could happen at a convergent boundary. So what I'll talk about first is called subduction. So subduction means going under. Now it's important to remember the oceanic crust is actually more dense than the continental crust, which is less dense. Now, anything that's less dense will float on top of something that's more dense. So as these two converge, as these two are coming together, what's going to happen is the oceanic crust will actually go under. It will go underneath the continental crust because it's more dense than the continental crust. It's going to look a bit like this. But that was your continental crust, which is less dense, and this is your oceanic crust, which is more dense. And you can see it's gone under. Now it's important to remember, again, what is under the crust? Well, under the crust we have the mantle. So as this go under, what's going to happen is this part here is actually going to melt. And it's going to be water that melts and the rock. So when the rock melts, it recycles. And when the water melts, it not melts but evaporates, it's going to cause basically a water pressure in the form of gas. Those gases want to escape, they want to go up because they love going up, but they're going to be blocked by the continental crust. So over time, that's actually going to cause so much pressure to be built up, crust, and things like volcanoes come about, right? So that happens at this area, which is called the subduction zone, because subduction occurs here. Subduction means that one goes underneath, one goes underneath the other, right? So that's subduction. Let me find that again. All right, now, this was the case if one is more dense, the other one is less dense. What if they're both the same densities? Well, that happens if, for example, two continental crusts collide, right? So if this is one plate that collides with another continental crust, so for example, like the Indian and the Asian plate, what's going to happen is none of them are going to go under. They're both actually going to go on top of each other. They're going to fold. It's called folding, and that's how mountains form, right? So these two continental crusts, they kind of collide. And so that's continental crust, and they are going to form, they're going to go upwards, they're going to form mountains. And that happens at converging boundaries, when both the crusts involved have the same density. So for example, continental crust slamming into continental crust, or oceanic crust into oceanic crust. That's that for 4 mountains. And then the last one was transform boundaries. Now in transform boundaries, as you can see in the picture here, we actually don't have them colliding or going apart. We have them kind of rubbing against each other side by side. But because these are not smooth edges, they're kind of rough edges, these plates, as they go side by side, will get stuck. And when they get stuck, they kind of take time to get unstuck. But once they get unstuck, well, bam, you're going to have a huge earthquake. Right? So these transform boundaries, nothing gets destroyed or created, but we have things like earthquakes.